Hello, student. Welcome to MGC Learning, Standard 12th, Subject English, Topic 2.5 Father Returning Home. Our poem for today is Father Returning Home by Dilip Chitre. Before going to the poem, let's have a look about our poet. Dilip Chitre, one of the foremost Indian writers and critics to emerge in the post independence India. He wrote in Marathi and English. Also, he was a painter and a filmmaker. He born in Baroda and his family moved to Mumbai in 1951. He published his first collection of poems in 1960s. Let's have a look about our poem. Alienation of the elderly in a modern world, isolation of old age, estrangement from a family, loneliness in a modern cities, modernization, loss of historical and cultural identity, and the setting is Mumbai, India. In this poem, the poet trying to explain the dirtiest condition of Indian urban primes, wherein the miserable and disintegrated life of the normal human being explained by the poet. He also symbolizes father as the mainstream person who taking care of his family and his belonging. He takes up the challenge of the getting up early in the morning and going traveling through miserable lines of metro, passing way all the suburbs and still coming back with the stale dainty food. His poorness and his poverty is being described through the saggy and soggy dirty chappal he's wearing, his clothes and his pants. Now let's have a look on our summary. Returning home. Number one is returning home. Father returning home in a metro on there are many suburbs passing by his thinking of nothing people around him to do not matter to him at all because he is lost in his own world of thoughts. Number 2, getting off the train. Despite it being a heavy humid monsoon season, he gets off the train. His chappals are muddy, yet he rushes home because he is tired and panic position. He need to get back home as soon as possible. Number 3, at home. At home he weekly sips in the tea and has his supper. After having his supper, he reads on to his book. His kids and his family is not interested to talking to him, not sharing his day-to-day conversation or day-to-day secrets to him. He is all bored up and he listens to uninterested radio that is playing in his room and moves on to sleep. He thinks of his ancestors about not to his children. Number 4 is a pathetic condition. The pathetic condition of a hard working family member is being described through this poem of Dilip Chitre. Now, let's have a look at the description of these stanzas. Our first stanza is My father travels on the late evening train, standing among silent commuters in the yellow light. Suburbs slide past his unseeing eyes. The first stanza of the father returning home describes the train journey of his father while returning home one evening. The father stands among commuters. Commuter means those who travel regularly from one place to another typically to work in the yellow light of a local compartment. The poet describes his father's reaction against the sight of the suburbs that pass by. His father remains unmoved by the sights because they are too familiar to him. That is quite normal, isn't it? We hardly pay attention to those places where travel every day unless the place has something interesting to offer. Same was with the poet's father. Let's take a next slide to you. His shirt and pants are soggy, and his black raincoat stained with mud, and his bag stuffed with books is falling apart. His eyes, dimmed by age, fade homeward through the humid monsoon night. The poet then describes his father's pathetic condition as he travels during the rainy season. His clothes became damp and dirty. The black raincoat that he wears becomes stained with mud. His bag crumbles with the heavy loads of books. So, here the poet in the first stanza itself is also trying to explain the condition of his father because it being a rainy season in India, it's a very humid, very dirty, and muddy all around. So, the poet is explaining his father's raincoat. He can see a lot of mud stained, and his bag is soggy, tumbled down with the heavy loads of books, and he is damp and dirty. Next, let's move further to next slide. Now, I can see him getting off the train like a word dropped from a long sentence. He hurries across the length of the grey platform, crosses the railway line, enters the lane. His chappals are sticky with mud, but he hurries onward. Due to old age, the poet's father's eyesight has become poor, and therefore he finds difficulty to move about in the dark. The poet says that he can see his father getting down the train like a word dropped from a long sentence. The sentence is highly unique and it provides an evocative image of an old man who gets down from the train as if he is no longer relevant to it. The poet then sees his father hurrying through the long grey platform. The man seems to be as old as the platform who has been using it as a part of his routine. He crosses the railway tracks and hurries home through muddy lanes on a rainy day. This is indicated by his chappals, which are sticky with mud. This stanza portrays the monotonous of the old man who sustains the vagaries of weather as well as the estrangement from the man made. Here, the poet is trying to explain this is a part of routine in that he has come to the platform to board a local train, look around the suburbs, ground reaches to his destination workplace, and reach back home. These are all acquainted to him and as old as he is. He's using all these facilities right from the beginning. And then he's talking about the crossing a lot of railway tracks and he running back to home through his muddy lanes on in rainy day, which is indicated by his muddy chapel. Let's move on to the next slide. This is a stanza number 2. In second stanza, home again, I see him drinking weak tea, eating a stale chapati, reading a book. In the second stanza, the poet represents the alienation of his father that he experiences in his own dwelling. The poet tells us that his father drinking a weak tea and eats a stale chapati when he comes back home. This shows that the evening his basic requirements are not properly carried out by his family. A sense of pity for the poet father arises in us. What do you think? Of course, we used to see when our fathers come back to house, they sit down. We a long chat with them. But here in this poem, poet explaining that his father becomes back to home with his very weak and a very hostile environment. He is not treated warmly there and feels himself to be alienated. He just weakly sips of tea and eats a stale chapati. He's not being taking care of his basic needs properly as well. Let's take a next slide to you. He goes into the toilet to contemplate men's estrangement from a man made world. The father is then seen going into a contemplative mood after reading some kinds of philosophical book. He goes to the toilet and contemplates over men's alienation from the man made world. Coming out, he trembles at the sink, the cold water running over his brown hands. A few droplets cling to the graying hairs on his wrist. This exhibits that the man is visibly upset with his predicament. He is terribly shaken when he comes out of the toilet and trembles while he washes his hand at the wash basin. It seems that he trembled not only because of the cold water but also due to the thoughts that came into his mind while he was thinking in the toilet. His sullen children have often refused to share jokes and secrets with him. He will now go to sleep listening to the static on the radio dreaming. The father himself all alone in his room as he is written off by his children. The children do not interact with their father, they do not share their joys or sorrows with him. To compensate their company, the father listens to the radio. Then he goes to sleep. In his sleep, he dreams about his ancestors and grandchildren. It seems that he is trying to communicate with his ancestors who had entered the subcontinent through the Khyber Pass in the Himalayas in the past. The dream mirrors that the old man is either thinking about his past, his ancestors, or his future, his grandchildren. Of his ancestors and grandchildren, thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. Here, it is a kind of relief to him from his mundane routine devoid of any human contact. Now, the poet's father is trying to actually take up a relief in his thoughts of his past or his future. This is to trying actually taking him or give him a kind of relief from his mundane routine devoid of any human contact. Now he is not in contact with his children these days. so it gives him to relief to think about his ancestors or about his future grandchildren. So students, that's all for the day. Thank you.